Unlearning, as you talk about it, for me, as I interpret it, is about getting past your own experience and bias so you can benefit from the experiences of others who walk different paths from you, but have the shared goals.
Welcome to the Unlearn Podcast, where host Barry O'Reilly seeks to synthesize the superpowers of extraordinary individuals to think big, start small, and learn fast. Here's your host, Barry O'Reilly.
Welcome to the Unlearn Podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Anurag Gupta, founder and CEO of Shoreline. Shoreline is a product that helps site reliability engineers reduce the heavy lifting of dealing with incidents so they can focus their time and energy on improving their systems. Anurag has been a leader in this space for a long time. Prior to Shoreline, he spent 7.5 years at AWS, where he ran their analytics and relational database services, starting from a tiny team to suddenly managing services deploying millions of nodes and tickets all over the world. Before AWS, he did a mix of management and technology roles and was actually in a team at Oracle when they only had 20 database engineers. Can you even imagine that? His story of twists and turns of entrepreneurship, technology exploration, and finding ways to innovate is fascinating. It's a great personal story and professional story of growth. So listen in and let's hear how it got started for him.
I joined Oracle when it was still a small company. Like there were maybe 20 some people in the database team.
That's hard to imagine there was 20 people ever in an Oracle database team. That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there were 5,000. My startup got acquired, but 5,000 the next time I was there. So, a fair difference between the two. So that was a lot of fun. I got to work hard, really learn things, sort of nose to snout, sort of nose to tail. And so that was great. But then, I kind of came to this point where I was like, does it matter to anybody whether we're faster or Informix is faster or Sybase is faster? I care, but this is just ego speaking. And around the same time, I read the book 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I'm sure you know it. And there's this point in the beginning where it talks about, okay, sit down in a quiet place and imagine you've died. What are people saying about you and who's saying it? I thought about it and I thought about what they would be saying about me, what I'd want to be the arc of my story. And I realized I knew what I wanted and I knew I couldn't do it, but I'm an engineer. So I'm able to break big problems into little ones, successive little ones to solve. And so I said, well, what I'll do is I'll join a startup, maybe 80 people, trade my tech skills at Oracle to, learn how to do startups. Then maybe I'll go to a 10-person company. Then I'll start my own thing. That actually came out. The story after that did take a change, but you don't really want to live your life the way some 24-year-old thinks that you should live your life. But at least for a portion of the arc, it was right. And I think it made a lot of sense, was fulfilling in a sort of greater purpose kind of way. It wasn't actually what I wanted to do, but it led me towards what I thought I'd want to do.
It's such a powerful technique. It resonates with me a lot too. I'm a big believer, maybe whatever vision you can create for yourself, it really helps focus. I find it inspires me. It pushes me. It keeps me focused on something. If you want something to come to life and create it, you have to envisage it. And I think it's a great exercise that many people don't do maybe enough of. It's actually really thinking like, where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years? What would it take? What would the experiences I'd need to create for myself to become the person that I want to be? Because that's what I think, as you described them as opportunities or starting a startup, they're all little experiments to become the person essentially that you want to be. And if you can't define that person, you can't really run those experiments, I feel.
I really believe, this may sound woo-woo to you, but I believe that if you really know what you want, the universe kind of bends its way to help you get it. If it's something worthwhile. I'm not saying if I want Tesla or something, I don't think anything's going to help me out there. But that's also, my own fault. If I want something real, I think the world will bend in my favor.
And you'll make it bend.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of the pace for sure. Tell me about the other points then as well that sort of jumped out to you then. This idea of the visioning piece is really important. What else struck you?
So prior startup got bought by Oracle. I went back to Oracle. From there, I went to AWS, that was an interesting experience. I didn't know anyone at Amazon. I didn't know anyone in Seattle even. And the job was in Seattle. So there were reasons why I had to stay here, but I'd commute up there 4 days a week. But it was an amazing job because they told me like, hey, here are 8 people. Go disrupt data warehousing and transaction processing. Now think of it. I just came from Oracle where they have 5,000 people and 5 millennia going into the product every year. And so, what I was thinking to myself is, how do I break that down? They've got a 30-year head start on me. And what I decided was, it's okay if somebody's got a head start and is running in that direction, as long as they're going the wrong way. Which immediately begs the question, okay, where can I go that's different, that where I can still find a community that has chosen not to go in that direction? Those 2 products turned into Aurora and Redshift, and they did really well. I mean, when I joined, database and analytics was a $3 million business. 8 years later, it was a $5 billion business. 8 people turned to 800. It was a good run.
Let me ask you more about this, because this is fascinating. I love contrarianism. I think it's like one of these superpowers sometimes of entrepreneurs. It's almost intuitive to them. People look at the mountain, and at that time, the mountain is Oracle, which, as you say, millions of hours of time, energy that they can focus and put into a product and keep building that mountain. It's almost irrational for most people to think that there's any way to usurp that, to shift the conversation for what is a pebble of 8 people. So how do you plot that path? It's something that I love hearing. Like, how did you make the bet to choose the path you did to almost create this whole new area? Because, as you say,
cloud databases were not a thing back then.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
And certainly no one was expecting AWS to build them from scratch, as opposed to, take other people's databases and run them for them. So I guess, I really believe in finding non-consumption, finding people who are unhappy and therefore not using stuff. But if you gave them something that, it might really take off. So for example, with Redshift, what I was looking at was what I call the analysis gap, where the growth of storage was growing almost 4 times faster than the growth of the enterprise data warehouse. So it's like, why are people storing this data that they're not trying to analyze? I asked somebody about that and said, my data warehouse is where data goes to die, because no one will let me put data into the data warehouse or run more queries or any of it. And so, I was like, okay, well, if I could be 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper and a whole heck of a lot simpler, maybe there's something here. That was sort of the birth of cloud data warehousing. I mean, nowadays, Snowflake is the king, but we kind of started that journey.
And it's fascinating, though, just even to hear the thought process. I even wrote it down as you said it, non-consumption. That's such a really interesting way to describe
that's
problems.
You can read that from, I think it's Christensen who came up with that.
Yeah. I want to tease it out a little bit more, right? Because for many people, it's such an interesting way to identify unmet needs. When I hear you describe that, you're looking at these problems that, even listening to you describe it there, you're scratching your head when you talk to people and they say, data warehouses is where my data goes to die. Apart from that, and obviously SharePoint is where documents go to die. Everyone knows that one. But this notion is very interesting as a way of teasing and finding things out. So what helped you have higher conviction in this space? What were some of the things that sort of gave you a sense that there's a real opportunity here? Like, what were the things that were moving around you? The technology innovations, it sounds like, were a key component of it. The human non-consumption, again, is really interesting.
You know what I think helped me was understanding that, hey, Oracle, when I was first there, was 20 people. And we built a big business.
Yeah, huge.
It's not impossible. And at the same time, one might argue that it's harder for them to innovate with 5,000 people than with 20. You can't put 5,000 people around a table. You can't go and do some big project and understand. You'll probably need 100 people to do anything large, like let's say Oracle Rack. But back then you needed 4 to figure it out from the top to the bottom. So it's different. And so, Jeff Bezos used to talk about the 2 pizza teams, like communication is the square of the number of participants. And so you really want to minimize communication, therefore you want to minimize the participants. And so, I kind of believe in that. The other thing is that really just believing it's okay to fail. Like if I hadn't joined AWS, what would I have done? I would have been the VP of engineering in some startup. Yeah. If I failed at AWS, what would I go to? I'd be the
VP of engineering
at some startup. And maybe I'd feel a little bit, sad and beaten down and whatever. But so what, right? That's just ego again. As long as, you kind of just, if you're going to take, and that's exactly, by the way, why AWS started me with like 8 people, because you can take your time and think. If they'd given me 300 people, I'd feel like I need to put all of these people to work right now.
Yeah. I love hearing people who are part of those designed experiences in a way about how AWS has created these huge products and businesses. Is every time I meet someone who's been there, they all started in these very, very small teams with a bold mission. Stephen Orban, who's probably one of you're probably familiar with as well, right? Yeah. Like Stephen was on the show before and talking about building out the data business that he worked on. And I still remember meeting him in New York. And, he took me up to where the team was kicking off. And it was like him and 2 other people. And he's like, oh yeah, no, this is the team, awesome. Barry. I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, no, this is it. And maybe one day we might have, like 5 people over there and 7 people over there. It gave me so much heart that how intentional the design of innovation was. And in so many other businesses, as you described, I would go into these Fortune 500 companies and they have an idea and instantly there's 150 people there and a huge burn rate and the pressure to produce something. It always really struck me when I hear these stories from folks like yourself of how true people hold to the constraints to make the innovation happen, which I think is fascinating. But you didn't again, AWS is just one step on your journey, starting Shoreline and going on so tell us more about just as you were, I'm sure in Oracle and you had this aha and an opportunity to go and create with AWS, right? You've been struck by more. Entrepreneurs never only have one idea. So tell us more about Shoreline and moving into sort of site reliability engineering, because for me, that's just such a fascinating field, especially as these systems keep getting bigger, more complicated. What was your insights there?
Let me tell you the personal story and then I can shift into the why Shoreline story. So sure. I'm sitting at AWS. I'm doing really well. I've got a great team, pretty good comm, really interesting work. And it really suits me. It's pretty much an ideal job. But here's the thing. I've got a special needs child. And my wife comes to me and she says, look, man, you're doing really well at your job. But if we want to not just help our own child, but all children like him, I need you to make 50, maybe 100 times what you're making right now. That just wasn't going to happen at AWS or Google or hedge fund or whatever, right? And, the big epiphany for me, the unlearning thing for me was, it doesn't matter how comfortable you are, how others perceive you. That's kind of the jail cell you put yourself in, but the door is open. And, if you're not on the path to your goal, you have to change your path or change your goal. Life's really that simple. And when I think of it, back to the 7 habits thing, who do I want to give my eulogy? What do I want him to say? I want him to say that I helped him and children like him, or that I tried and I failed. I mean, I'm proud of Aurora, but who cares? What you leave behind at core are the people you touch, not what you did.
You're giving me shivers here, listening to that type of story. It's profoundly inspiring. And yet, even just to hear you talk about this notion again of this power of visioning, Because both of those stories, whether you tried to help and you succeeded or you tried to help and you didn't, they're both fantastically noble stories. They both carry equal weight in my mind, right?
People really love talking about folks who are successful, but the key is the people who try.
Right on. You're really actually giving me a bit of inspiration, which I need today. So thank you for that already. As you say, like whether it's life, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's tackling hard problems, the notion, it's funny, and something I constantly am trying to instill a role model in myself, both for my teams and even my kids. It's like what matters is that you try. It's the act of the attempt is what matters, because results are often outside our control. Sometimes you succeed,
Exactly.
sometimes you fail. For me, they're just the feedback. They're just
you particularly learn that in startups, right? It's a lot of it's about luck.
That's it. It's showing up and having another go. There's nothing learned from quitting. You just learned that you quit, but keep trying. That's a special place. So tell us then how you've encoded this then into Shoreline. That's why I love having entrepreneurs on the show, is because it's never about the business. It's always about the person, the the values, the behavior. And if you can get those into yourself and be true to them, what you manifest is companies, or it changes in the world, or helping special needs kids have the help that they need. Like, this is what happens. So tell us more about Shoreline, even what encouraged you even to identify that as an opportunity.
So, it's again one of those areas of non-consumption. So one of the things I learned a lot building and operating services at AWS is what people care about most is that they're up all the time, not about the features, not about the performance. They don't necessarily realize that, but they realize it when they go down. They need them to be basically up, indistinguishable from 100%. At AWS, we did a decent job at that, and we got better every year. I mean, it's all about relentless improvement. But most companies out there just throw bodies at the problem. For every dollar they spend on cloud infrastructure, they're spending $3 on the people to manage it, which is insane. And I've heard people say like 50 to 90% of what they do in production ops could be automated. So that's pretty cool. I mean, imagine how much time and money they could redeploy to innovation if they could free themselves up from keeping the lights on. It's hard for me to imagine going into work, coming home. My wife asks him what you did. Honey, I kept the lights on. It's not, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. So I've had some great people on the show. It's funny. One of the reasons I really do the show, it's like my personal development. I get to listen to stories from people like yourself, and I'm always left reminded, I write down 2 or 3 things, I need to do more of this or remind myself of that. It's fascinating, right? One of the other people I've had on the show, I'm sure you know, is Casey, who set up the chaos engineering team at Netflix. He's obviously gone on to build his own company at the moment too as well. But this notion, where the reliability of systems now and the technologies we have are so complex, it is impossible for any one person to hold it all in their head, to understand why failures happen. And all of this amazing innovation starting to happen around managing really complex systems to keep the boring lights on, right? As you say. But it's such a fascinating space now as people think about exploring safety systems and human factors. And I had the pleasure to go and do a workshop with John Allspaw and people who are really diving deep into human safety systems and applying that into software engineering. Really fascinating 2 days. I was just sitting in a room with physicians and software engineering talking about managing complex systems. Fascinating.
There are a couple of things I tease out of what you just said because you're spot on. The first is that as an engineer developing software, you're going deep into one area. As an operator maintaining software, you have to know enough about everything. And you don't know who's going to be on call. You don't know what's the issue that's going to arise. So that's really a tough game. The difference between being a medical specialist versus being in the ER. You don't know who's going to come in through the door. It's very different, but there's a lot of stuff that we can map over from, so to speak, the real world. We've been doing industrial control theory for good solid 100, 200 years. So those models that we use to manage complex systems there, can we bring them to model software systems today? Well, I mean, clearly the answer is yes, but I don't think that's how we think.
And not enough people talk about it. That's the thing that has struck me. I've been lucky to be exposed to these ideas almost through meeting people like yourself. I often describe myself as a failed engineer. That's what I studied in university. My first job was like writing code, but my path followed me more to product management. And
Sure.
that was my curiosity. You know, I loved writing code 1 day out of 5, but I loved trying to figure out product problems 5 days out of 5. And that's how it worked out.
You like, debugging people more so than debugging code.
Under the code, damn right on that. It is fascinating, again, like to see what's starting to, I guess, permeate the technology conversation is going back and looking at human factors and resilient systems engineering, which, as you say, has existed for 100 years, whether we're building bridges, where we're building planes that make them safe for people to fly on, the errors that happen and how they can have these massive effects, unintended consequences. I've just learned so much from sitting, as you say, with a surgeon describing the human body as a complex adaptive system, and then listening to someone like yourself talking about the architecture that you're trying to design for a website and how that is a complex adaptive system. It's been fascinating. But one thing that is really interesting that always goes through is the creation of community. People who are exploring these ideas are creating communities, whether it was chaos engineering with the folks at Netflix, whether it was the community that John Allspaw was bringing together. Well, it was very fascinating to me. You're also doing something similar as well in your space, reliability, like people who are passionate about that space. So can you tell us a little bit about how much community has played a role in a lot of these innovations that you've created? Because I can see it's part of your makeup, right? A community, even in your personal life, to support your situation and your son, right through to these software communities. So tell us a little bit more about reliability.org and what's inspired you there.
Really just have kicked that off. It's a nonprofit. Unlearning, as you talk about it, for me, as I interpret it, is about getting past your own experience and bias so you can benefit from the experiences of others who walk different paths from you, but have the shared goals. This is a nonprofit community created for engineers who want to learn how to design, build, operate highly reliable systems, indistinguishable from 100% uptime. It's an environment away from people selling stuff, even people like me selling stuff in my commercial offering too, where we can just debate and learn from each other's perspectives, where we can talk about a Datadog outage one week or the East Palestine train wreck a prior week or whatever. So, it's still small, but you have listeners who are interested in reliability. I'd encourage them to join and just work with each other. And, it matters a lot in this world where local incidents can have really broad impact. But building these systems remains a black art. So why not learn from the people who, rather than having to get the scars on your back through bitter experience?
Again, I think it's one of these contrary viewpoints where so much, especially in a competitive industry, there's always this tendency to say, oh, we can't share information. We need to lock up our stories. There was an incident. We can't tell people what happened, which you're here laughing and smiling for the viewers who probably can't see you, right? Because you obviously have firsthand experience about how antiquated those ideas are. It's actually the opposite. And this is a great unlearning I always find, is that the high performing teams, when there's an incident, they almost get excited. They're like, we're going to figure out some assumption that we thought was correct is actually invalid, and we're going to make the system more resilient. We're going to make it respond better to that instance in the future. And I've seen people gathering around with nothing but curiosity to understand, how did this happen? No looking for blame, a neck to choke. It's a true and really fascinating environment where I think most people can even understand that exists.
Yep.
Because their experience of failure is, it's your fault. You did something wrong. The boss is coming to get you. And yet that couldn't be anything further removed from what high-performing teams do. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because you live this. How you create that environment, I think, is so important.
You're exactly right when you think about blameless cultures and so forth. For every large-scale event at AWS, you'd gather around and you'd write the cause of error report, and which would have the timeline of what happened, when it was detected versus when it started, when it was first diagnosed, who got involved, when it was repaired, all of the many, many steps. And your goal then is to collapse the steps wherever they may be. It might be having better monitors, it might be whatever, and you have to create a action list. The key thing in the action list is that it should be mechanistic. It should be processes, because you can improve processes. You can improve mechanisms. It's very hard to improve people because new people come in, old people leave, people make mistakes. Very few people come in and say, this is the day I'm going to break the website. If you have that problem, you've got bigger issues.
Yeah, exactly. You got the wrong people in there.
But, websites break. And so why does that happen? So you really need to work on ways that you take a very long-term view and you say okay, 1% better every week. That's all I want. And how do you get there? It's by learning from others and, applying their experience and bad luck and so forth.
Yeah, it's fascinating, And that's why I love hearing you, again, taking these lessons and trying to bring them to a community in an open forum like reliability.org, where people can show up and learn from. I always say this all the time. I want to make better mistakes than the mistakes I made yesterday, or
exactly.
Hopefully people can learn from my mistakes and make better mistakes themselves than I made. It's such a helpful space and community, as you say, to grow this discipline, because our systems ain't getting easier. They aren't getting simpler. They seem to only become, as you described yourself, it's harder for us to see what's happening inside the processor unit or the data model, or more and more. We can't. We're not capable of it. So it just becomes more and more interesting. So for you then, looking ahead, what are you most interested about? What are the areas of the technology where Shoreline's going, your own personal journey? What are some of the things that are sort of standing out to you that you're excited about, as well as you're starting to build this community with reliability.org?
For a Shoreline, I'm really interested in how do I build something that's ubiquitous, where if anyone anywhere has fixed a problem, that everyone everywhere gets the benefit. Because that would be an amazing place. There's this maybe open source family of solutions, because you know what? We all sit on the same infrastructure. We all use the same databases. We all use the same messaging systems. Yeah, the apps are different, but they all sit on the same app servers and languages for the most part. You might as well get the benefit. Why is it so secretive right now? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. As you say, you're willing it into existence with reliability.org. So again, I thank you again for sharing your story. It's fascinating to learn more about you as a person, as well as the businesses and the initiatives that you're working on. Again, thank you very much for sharing. And I look forward to maybe having you back on the show again to hear how reliability.org has grown over the sort of months and years ahead. I think it'd be fascinating to follow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barry. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Hey everyone. I hope you enjoyed that show, but I'm even more delighted to share the exciting news. I've recently co-founded a new venture studio named Nobody Studios. Now, Venture Studio is a vehicle for the rapid creation of new companies, from ideation to acceleration and growth. And our purpose at Nobody Studios will be to de-risk pre-seed stage business ideas. We'll do this by minimizing the time, speed, and capital involved in validating truly repeatable and scalable business models before any significant venture investment. We've an audacious goal to start 100 compelling companies over the next 5 years, and who knows how many beyond that. So if you're interested in radically changing the way work is done, how products are created, companies built and funded, even democratizing the wealth creation and how returns are distributed, this could be the business for you. We're looking for talent, capital, and influence. If you wish to contribute any or all of these, just get in touch. You can follow us on nobodystudios.com, on our LinkedIn page, all the social media accounts, or simply my newsletters and what I'm sharing. We'll be launching a truly innovative crowdfunding campaign, and I'd be honored if you'd be willing to join us on this journey and become a nobody yourself.